Most to our participants.
Over.
The account owner can also watch this recording if it.
It is 4 p.m. and we are here for the Citizen Advisory Committee meeting. To start with, I'm not sure if we have a quorum or not, like 9. I don't think we have a quorum, do we?
Not yet. We got one on the screen.
Do we count the online ones?
Fortunately, we can't count these two online, just given the Brown Act regulations around it. Magic number is 11. Oh, that's 19 of found that number this afternoon, so 11 is the number. Okay. 1, 10. 11 is the back right now.
Oh.
So we have a quorum, all right?
No, like in about 30 seconds.
Okay, okay. We have a quorum now. Let us start with the introductions. I am Musa Abbasi. I'm the vice chair, and I'll be chairing this meeting because our chair is, he has some travel, plans,
Steve Bertelbaugh, representing the Sierra Club.
Tom Conlon, representing the Sonoma County Conservation Council.
Carol Taylor, representing North Bay Organizing Project.
Era Sweeper, Sonoma County Bicycle Coalition.
Mark Hale, representing the EIA.
Jake McKenzie, representing Transportation and Land Use Coalition.
Jerry Glazer, representing the North Bay Electric Auto Association.
Tom Manning, representing District 3.
Dennis Herder, representing Sonoma County Alliance.
Kathleen Cortez, Area Agency on Aging.
Mark Sloan, representing Supervisor Rabbits District.
Introduction.
Robin Barfalo, Sonoma County Farm Bureau.
Thank you, Ron. Online, like Annie. Can you introduce yourself who are online, please?
Gina Erickson.
Catherine Stubbs, SCTA.
Dave River, SCTA.
Yeah, I see.
You're muted.
Okay, we'll start with the staff, their introductions, please.
James Cameron, Sonoma County Transportation Authority.
Eric Ray, Sonoma County Transportation Authority. Paula Goss, Sonoma County Transportation Authority.
Thank you. Any public comments on the agenda? Do you see any, Drew? Okay, no comments. We'll move to item 3 of the agenda, approval of the June 26 meeting minutes.
Move to approve.
Any second?
Second.
Discussion? I see none. Let us vote, approving the minutes, aye.
Aye.
Any noes or nays, I didn't see any abstain.
I wasn't here last night, so I'm not sure.
You are abstaining.
Thank you.
The major M items will start with Shauna, the project presentation about.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Sure, there's room for everybody before I sat down. Good afternoon, everyone. so the first item under Measure M is the project presentation schedule. We presented this last month. This is simply a revision based on, there was a missing, I think not a missing, but there was a presentation that was scheduled that doesn't have an appropriation. They have fully expended their funds, so I had to remove that, and I believe I added somebody else. So this is just an informational item. It takes no further.
Mine is still on there.
Well, I took it off.
It's still there, at least
Oh,
on the
shucks.
packet that I
All
read
right, well-
today.
The bike safety?
Bicycle safety
Yeah,
and
the bike to
education.
work day.
Bike, yeah.
Yeah. it's-
That, I apologize. I don't, maybe I saved the wrong one, but yes. And to take that off. Thank you, Eris. I apologize.
So this will go to the transportation board or just information?
This is just informational for you. We generally don't take it to the board, but I can if the CAC wants us to.
I
Yeah,
think
one
it
of-
would be a good thing, to take it, just. If they have information and or any feedback or something, or to know what we are doing. Yeah.
Sure, we can put it on consent and I will fix that.
One topic that I was ignorant of until I attended a meeting on Friday down at the MTC was a topic of one-seat paratransit. And is that something that we would cover as well? I'm thinking that for paratransit, we have 2 counties here or 3 counties. And what happens in most places is that a paratransit, they get on one and then they get at the edge of their zone. Now they have to transfer to another and have to coordinate. Is that a topic maybe we should be discussing?
Dana, do you want to handle that? I can say before you get to a mic that all 3 agencies do in fact operate paratransit and they do receive Measure M funding, but they report out on it as part of the transit presentation. So I'd be happy to ask them to include that information.
Okay.
Yeah, and I'll just chime in that the local bus transit operators have had a one-seat paratransit pilot program going on over the past year or a little more. So we can definitely ask them to include that information.
No, yeah, the comment, I was almost struck on my bike by one of those paratransit drivers last week.
Oh.
Who apparently, well, this was in the city of Santa Rosa and the bus said it was Santa Rosa city bus, but I sent the video and reported it, but apparently those are contracted out. So it's not actually city bus drivers who was driving that, but.
But they're contractors.
Are they,
They're contractors.
are they volunteers? Because sometimes I see, like they are looking for volunteers. Are they volunteer drivers?
No, yeah, MB Transit is in
Yeah,
for city bus. Yeah, the county is volunteer wheels.
On this item, so we'll be getting a presentation on August 28 or is, so, but it won't be.
It'll be safer routes to school, just not the bike to work day
Thank
component.
you for that
because,
clarification.
we've spent all our money on that one.
Okay. And
I see that topic to be discussed, in the September 25th, transit operators. Probably we can ask them, to cover that issue.
Yes, exactly. That is my plan. I will do that. Absolutely.
There's another topic that I'd like to bring up, and again, at the MTC, we're working on the regional management. We've got 27 different transit districts in the Bay Area. In our county, we have 3 different bus transit districts. Is it possible during the presentation? We have how many?
No, we have more if you count Golden Gate.
Well, I'm not counting Golden, I'm just saying
Okay.
within our county,
Yeah.
the ones that are within our county, we have Golden Gate as well. One of the things I'd love to hear about also when the buses come around at the very least, and I was only talking about the bus transit. Why do we have 3? Why is that beneficial? Should we be considering looking at how we can integrate them and make the services a little bit better? One reason that occurred to me, besides the fact that at the MTC level, I'm looking for funding. Part of the pitch to the state is we're going to try to rationalize our transit districts in the Bay Area so we can get more money. The other part was when I ride Smart. When I go to Marin, when the Smart train stops at each station, I see there's a bus there. But through our county, when the Smart train stops at a station, I have to walk someplace. I didn't understand why that worked like that, and I'm guessing that part of it is we aren't thinking about this in an integrated fashion. So anyway, in the presentations that we get, I'd love to see how the different districts are thinking about, and that was the reason I asked the questions Smart last time, thinking about how we integrate the services.
That's all you.
Yeah,
Dana.
so, you know, I think that we could probably integrate this into the same presentation, but certainly willing to entertain separate items, specifically on transit integration work that we've been doing.
That'd be great.
We completed a study in 2019 on integration of the 3 bus operators, and now we're doing some implementation work. So we can, I could work with Shauna to figure out if it would be better as a separate full presentation or part of the transit.
That's just me. I don't know if everybody else is interested.
We have a gap someplace. I think we can fit it in. I think that's a good idea.
And look at, I'm just learning about transit because when I started working with the MTC, I started taking buses and trains for the first time in 40 years. And you know, it doesn't fit together.
Yeah, we should probably all reread the 2019 transit integration study to be sure we're primed with good questions for the operators.
So, this item is in fact a Measure M presentation schedule, so it refers specifically to those recipients of Measure M funds, as opposed to the transit integration. While there is overlap between those two groups, transit integration is a much bigger topic, and I think deserves its own item that we can bring at another time when there will be more time for discussion.
That's great. Yeah.
I think we are talking about, integration, not consolidation, right?
Sure. Yes.
Well, we could be talking about both.
So the 2019 study does kind of look at all options.
Yeah.
But the work, implementation work we're doing right now is integration.
But also, I think, these, topics you mentioned, can be discussed, during the presentation, on the 29th September, sorry, 25th. Rather.
Yeah, that was part of what I was asking as well.
Personally, I don't expect, like an immediate, changes, there are jurisdictional issues, about transit.
Well, and it's a fairly large topic to have
Yeah, I know.
4 operators come in and talk to us, because Smart will also be here for the transit operator discussion. So it generally in the past has taken as much as an hour of this committee's time just for the presentation, whereas we usually try to confine it to about 20 minutes to a half an hour. But it's just not possible with all the transit operators together giving presentations. So.
Any more discussion about the presentation schedule?
Yes, I have one more thing. So I assume you guys thought about the timing of some of these projects in slotting these in the months that you have. But specifically, I'm thinking about Arnold Drive and the 116 to 121 intersection projects. Are those at opportune times? We're not missing big decisions and opportunities for input on those projects? Those are well timed?
Generally, I would say that, yes, that's true. I mean, the 116, 121 project is ready to go to construction. It's already been awarded, or no, it hasn't been awarded. The low bid was announced.
Okay.
And award has been recommended. And the other one that you want, the Arnold Drive bike lanes. Yeah, what we do try to do is put all of one sponsor's projects together, because that makes it easier for them. They don't have to come to the committee multiple times because it's large part. So we do try to time it out, and it's also based on when they presented last year. We try to keep at least a year between when they have to come to the committee, just so that there's enough time for the project to develop and for things to occur. It's not, and they're reporting out essentially on how Measure M has been used to date. You know, and what they plan to use Measure M for in the future. So there's, and they go through a fairly rigorous review process and getting to that point where money is available. So it's less of a yay or nay, but certainly taking input at opportune times where they still have time to change it is excellent.
Right, so I know this committee did pay a lot of attention to that particular project, and so I was just wanting to be sure we weren't missing an opportunity for input. So, because we do have the open slot the month before that. But I don't.
For Arnold Drive?
Well, for the, maybe even to ask them to move their whole package up a month, if that would be reasonable. I'm not saying that it's necessary. I'm just saying it would be some consideration for you, maybe. You know, if they're at a milestone that would have happened before we had a chance to input, might be helpful to do that.
I will discuss it with David and see if any of these projects are at a milestone that are at a place that input from the committee would be beneficial before then.
Thank you. I think that'd be good for
And
everybody.
revise if necessary. I'm not sure that we will need to revise, but
Precisely. Yes,
because
understood.
this has been to the TAC twice. So.
Okay, fine.
Any other comments about this item? I see none. Let us move to the strategic implementation plan of this channel.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. So Drew, if you could pull up that presentation, that'd be helpful. Thank you. So as you are aware, SCTA was, or not SCTA, the voters of Sonoma County approved Go Sonoma in November of 2020. And as part of the expenditure plan, there is a requirement to develop a strategic implementation plan by December 31st of 2023. So staff has been working on doing that. Oh, thank you very much. So staff has been working on developing the strategic implementation plan for Go Sonoma. We are in fact using the Measure M as a framework, the Measure M strategic implementation plan as a framework for building off of. And so we are in the process of updating not updating, but creating a new strategic implementation plan for Go Sonoma, which is an extension of Measure M, which is why we feel comfortable using the Measure M strategic plan as the framework.
And how you create 150 pages so fast.
Right. So the format will follow the same general principles. There will be an executive summary, background chapter, the strategic approach and programming chapter, the policies and procedures chapter, and then there will be the financial plan. And then we will include project information sheets for those projects that have been selected to receive Go Sonoma funding already as part of the first cycle of the SCTA funding program, because we did a call for projects when we were trying to also coordinate several other fund sources, including the One Bay Area grant and the State Transportation Improvement Program, trying to get all of that put together. So we did do a call for projects and included Go Sonoma as one of those options. So we do have the first 2 years of Go Sonoma competitive funds programmed already. So that will be included. So those projects that were selected for that will be included in the project information sheets. This differs from Measure M in that Measure M identified projects ahead of time and the voters gave us a yay or nay. And in Go Sonoma, we will only have apportionment programs, which is a certain percentage for certain items, roads, transit, and then competitive programs where we will evaluate projects based on their merit and their ability to meet goals that are established in the measure and in our comprehensive transportation plan, as well as the regional transportation plan. and then select projects based on how those projects meet those goals.
So my question is, last December, we heard from CARB, the Air Resources Board,
Mhm.
that we have a goal of reducing VMT by 25% per capita by the year 2030. Where does that decision or that goal fit into what we're talking about here?
Well, that happened after Sonoma was approved, but certainly we include as many goals as we can in trying to implement these projects. We're getting into new territory in that performance evaluation has never been part of our requirement thus far for Measure M. So we don't necessarily have a performance requirement. However, we are trying to establish evaluation criteria where we might be able to do that in the future, but we have to at least get to a point where we are collecting data and we have something to compare it to. So I know that can I get to the?
Oh, yeah, just finish the presentation and then the question will leave it after that.
Great, thank you. So there, in updating or in building the new strategic implementation plan for Sonoma, there are a few places where it differs from Measure M, and I wanted to draw your attention to those sections since this is what is included in your agenda packet today. So we are currently asking for review of Chapter 4, which is the policies and procedures chapter, and the information sheets that we've already developed. These are not formatted as they will be for the strategic implementation plan. These are simply Word documents that have been reproduced to contain all this information so that we have somewhere to keep it before we send it to the graphic artist. And then the appendices that will be included in the strategic plan. And those are listed in the packet in the staff report, and I can actually go back to that just so you know. The appendices will include templates for the cooperative agreements for all of the programs, templates for the reporting letters, templates for appropriation requests, the evaluation criteria that will be used in the calls for projects, and the Sonoma expenditure plan. So that being said, the sections that we think are changed enough that we would like to draw your attention to them, because the rest of it is essentially very similar to what was included in the Measure M strategic plan. But these are the sections that we think that you might have interest in. And the first one is section 4.1, and that applies to the annual apportionment programs. The Sonoma Transit Apportionment Program will include up to 2% of the program apportionments available for free fare programs on a reimbursement basis. This is different from what was available to Measure M recipients in the transit program. Also, there is a 3% of the program that is available to develop first and last mile programs that will be managed by SCTA.
Is that from all transit?
Yes. The next section that is different is.
Before we move on,
Sure.
and is that discretionary to the board? That 2% could be 4%, or is that specified
It's
previously?
up to 2%, and it is based on reimbursement. So as long as, and we're in the middle of writing it, and it's pretty vague right now.
Mhm.
So if you would like to see more specificity, please suggest that to us. And we're still working on developing how this is going to roll out.
Because the thing that I saw when I read this is we aren't like capping free fare at 2%, right? Which would mean that
For
it's only
reimbursement from Sonoma.
from Sonoma. But would that then be used by the agencies as a reason not to increase the free fare scale of their free fare programs? That would be at their discretion to do so.
Their discretion.
To go
Yes.
beyond that. And then if I understand the SCTA administered first last mile programs, that's completely new, right? You guys
Yes.
haven't done anything like that before.
That's correct.
So that strikes me as kind of cool and an opportunity. And then again, the same question, is 3% also specified in the original measure?
Yes.
Not long, but the original
Yes.
measure. Thank you.
Sure. So the second section that is different from the Measure M strategic plan is section 4.5, which applies to competitive programs. This section is competitive programs, is entirely new because we did not have competitive programs at Measure M. This is the first time. So the competitive program section also includes a 5% for capacity building. And the intent is for that to be administered by SCTA and it will be for sponsor support in preparing grant applications, technical studies, and public engagement, that sort of thing. So we're trying to help the jurisdictions build a stable of projects that are ready to go when grants come available that will fit whatever program comes up. So frequently, that's a pretty big scramble, right? At a very short amount of time. You know, you find out there's a release of a notice of federal funding opportunity, and then 2 months will go by, and then somebody will say, hey, maybe we should consider this, and then another month goes by, and then they're a month from the deadline, and they've got to do GHG emission reduction analysis, and they have to do technical studies. They need to know, they need to have done some sort of public engagement. This is the kind of thing that we're looking to help them with because it's often overwhelming. So if SCTA has the ability to help them with these types of technical requirements, we can help them build this stable of projects that will be ready to go when funding becomes available. So that's the intent of the capacity building, is being ready for projects as they come, being ready for funding as it comes along. It also includes the evaluation criteria. These are the evaluation criteria that we used for the SCTA funding program, and we have not changed them. They address both the CTP and RTP goals. And it also includes timing for calls for projects, which we had to establish. This is just, we're proposing about every 4 years. We would like to sync it up with the One Bay Area grant cycles that happen. So that's kind of the intent of when we would do the next call for projects.
Just a clarification, the capacity building, looking for grants, is that done abstractly or is it done specifically because here's a project and we're going to look for grants for that project?
Both. I
Both,
think
okay.
the intent is to make sure that, we're still trying to put our arms around what that would mean, but we know that help is needed. We've done polling with the jurisdictions. We've tried to understand what their needs are, and it's become clear to us that they do not have the resources to establish this. So
You would have a library essentially then of these are the grants that we know exist, and somebody comes along with a project, hey, let's look at this one.
yeah, and also we, as part of the SCTA funding program, we asked for the jurisdiction's top 5 priorities, but we weren't able to fund the top 5 priorities for every project, for every jurisdiction. So we have projects that are still out there that we know the jurisdictions want to build that there's no money for. So what can we do for these projects to make them more eligible or more appealing to the funding programs that come along? Dennis.
Can you just quickly clarify 5% of what?
5% of the competitive program. So and
So that segment of that program, thank you.
Mhm.
Is there like a page or a sheet that summarizes the percentages of each program and sub-programs of that one? That would be helpful.
Yes, and it's in the expenditure plan. It's not quite that straightforward. So the 2% and the 3% and those are included in the text of the expenditure plan, and the percentages of the programs themselves are in fact included as represented by a pie chart in the expenditure plan, which is an attachment to the staff report.
But what I'm suggesting, have one sheet, each program.
Yes, we
And
can
then after
absolutely
each
include that.
program, break it down
Yes,
into, sub-programs percentages, rather
Yes.
than going, into the text and these things. That's what I'm proposing.
yes, that's an excellent idea, and that is intended to be included in the strategic approach chapter, which is chapter 3, which we haven't drafted yet. We're still working on that part. So we're trying to make sure, but we are trying to write some sort of policy and procedure, and this is what we're focusing on today.
You said there's an attachment with that pie chart in the staff
Yes.
report?
Not in the staff report, it's in the link to the staff report, which includes all of the sections, so chapter 4, the appendices, the
Oh,
project
okay.
information.
I was gonna say, I was just gonna go look for that thing, so I didn't see it.
I haven't read it there.
Boy,
It's a link, because it's big.
all 158 pages I got through, but I haven't ever seen that.
Yeah.
It's all the way at the end in the expenditure plan. Okay, so let's. So that's 4.5. The other sections that we'd like to draw your attention to are the eligible cost guidelines. So the SCTA project sponsor or project support requested by a project sponsor. This is if a project sponsor wants help doing any part of project management of their Go Sonoma project, they could come to SCTA and ask for it, and we would take that to the board for consideration. That section is relatively new. And 4.12, under reporting, we've always required annual reporting, which would be the financial aspect. What we are updating in this strategic implementation plan is a requirement of quarterly reporting, which would be more of a status update on a quarterly basis. So
Instead in addition to or instead of?
it would be in addition to, yeah, so the financial reporting would still continue to happen on an annual basis, but the quarterly reporting would be they reached the environmental document milestone or something else, or the design phase has been extended or something like that, where, or, they're considering changing the project scope based on, public engagement, something like that.
That quarterly, reporting to your agency. Not
That's
to the
correct.
board.
That's correct. But it would be public. We're working with VSCE, which is a contractor who is trying to help us develop prototypes that we would use to make it available and hopefully post directly to our website so that it would be available for anyone who wanted to look at it.
Not a burden on staff to repackage it.
That's right. So, right now, we're in the process of taking all of this to the committees for review this month, and we're requesting that you provide feedback to us by August 15th. And other sections will also be brought to the committee for review. So as I mentioned, that strategic approach has not been completed yet. That will also come to you. And, we'll try to have something a bit more polished when we come to you next time. But this is what we've completed so far, and we wanted to get it under your eyeballs as soon as possible. And then we will be taking a draft to the board in December. I do not anticipate that to be the final version because this will be the first time the board sees it. So we will we will be taking input after we get that part put together, and then it could go on before that, but the development of the plan and the presentation to the board will meet that requirement of making December 31st.
So before we start the discussion, let me ask a couple of questions. You may, my understanding that you will include also the project information sheets and also the appendices. These are not, you don't have draft.
Yes, those are in there. Under the link, yes,
Under the link?
that's correct.
Okay, it was
It
because
says only draft
Okay.
chapter 4. I apologize. Yeah, it should just include it should just be everything under there. All of the supporting documents are there, not just the
and
draft
the
chapter.
other question, Probably it is related to item 5, like the composition of this group, because we have a new measure, gross and over. Will you go into the formation of this group when, the new measure will start, or will this continue? The citizen advisor.
The Citizen Advisory Committee is established by ordinance and is separate from Measure M Morgoson. So there will be no change
No
to
change.
the committee makeup based on what is presented here.
Got it. Thank you. We'll open it for discussion.
Mr. Chair.
Question, so the funding for assisting, with grant applications and all that stuff, will that only be for jurisdictions, or might that be available for the education and encouragement program providers?
I think we haven't made that decision yet, David.
I
Correct?
believe that for the 2 competitive programs, only the jurisdictions are eligible for those 2 fund sources. So I think that probably wouldn't allow us to use it for the education, but we'll have to look at that more.
Because that is an apportionment type of availability. It's not competitive. It's a cutoff.
So I just scanned through the link briefly before this meeting, and I was wondering, are there any markups in there specifically on areas you want us to comment on? Or we just go by what you've just run through?
Yes, that is not marked in there. I tried to give you a clean copy because it was pretty messy. There was quite a lot going on in the markup.
Focus our comments on what you just reviewed. Okay, second point, just to circle back to the point Steve brought up early on for performance metrics. If for any of these Go Sonoma projects, if there's a traffic study done somewhere along the line, will that automatically be in the reports? You were saying this is new territory.
It is new territory, and I'm not sure how we would manage that. We might be able to link it if the jurisdiction were to provide a copy, but it's not something that we would curate ourselves because there would be a lot. I would have to ask, this would be a discussion. If you would like to include that in your suggestions, then I can bring that up with Chris Barney and we can see what if there's anything we can do to include that information in a model. I don't know that we have that capacity. I don't know that we have those resources.
Thinking of the previous VMT comment. Yes, exactly.
I think, I would like to follow up on this suggestion. You can add to the project sheet, just, link to documentation, for example, to the city or the jurisdiction, what studies they have done in that regard, including the graphic studies, rather than including the actual information.
Yeah.
So could I ask, are there other committees that are reviewing this document? The Technical Advisory Committee of all the cities, is this their place where they're reviewing the document?
Yes, we took it to the Technical Advisory Committee last week. And which includes all of the jurisdictions. And we intend, it should probably go out to the Transit Technical Advisory Committee. It should go, and the final version, I think, we could consider taking it to the CAAC, which is the review committee, the committee for, remind me what it stands for. There it is. Which is required to be included when we do evaluations of the projects. So including them in how this is written out is probably a good idea.
And how have the cities been reacting to this? This one chapter is 158 pages.
Yes,
It's very dense.
it is indeed, which is why I wanted to draw your attention to the places that it essentially changed versus most of it should look very similar to what you've already seen in the Measure M strategic plan. However, yes, I don't know that they were overwhelmed with the volume. I did hear from some of the committee members that the goals should be goals and not necessarily requirements. And we agreed to disagree on that, but we would, I was seeking input from them, so I had to keep track of what they were saying, but I haven't heard much about the volume so far.
But the distribution of the monies is set by the measure.
Correct.
So there's no discussion about changing percentiles or anything like that.
That's correct.
Okay, thanks.
Sure.
A couple of points. One, going back to Steve's point, you actually have a clause in section 4.5 that talks about traffic. That comes close to talking about encapsulating it. I don't think it should be about traffic, it should be about travel, where it talks about increasing and making easier and less expensive and reducing DMT. It's all covered in 4.5, but it's talking about traffic because that was always our orientation. If we can find all the traffic things and start talking about travel instead, that'll address VMT as well as all the different ways that we get people from point A to point B. And the document's not that long because I got all the way through the part that has the content, but I didn't realize the appendices at the very end, which I should have reviewed. But there's 100 pages worth of projects or 80 pages worth of projects, and I can skip over those because we'll see them a project at a time. So the framework is a lot easier to get through than the document itself. One of the things that I want to contest is the allocation method. And the reason I want to contest it's not because I'm from the North Bay Electric Auto Association, but because I live in Sebastopol. And Sebastopol has a population of 7,800 people and has a small number of roads. It's a small area, but it serves 35 to 50,000 people. So the allocation doesn't understand for the different districts necessarily what the impact is for them. Anybody who lives in the North Bay recognizes the traffic going through Sebastopol, and that's for the roads in Sebastopol and the various pieces there. So I think extending in this definition, extending more and finding a different way to work the formula for allocation would be appropriate. And it's not just for Sebastopol, it would be other places as well. We're looking for the impact and how that will actually go back to section 4.5, start improving the travel for everybody. I probably have more points, but I have to find them.
So can I just see if I'm understanding
Yeah.
what you're saying correctly? Because if I do, it's kind of cool. So is what you're saying that rather than using population and road miles as the things, it's that how many people are actually traveling through your jurisdiction?
Yeah, how many people are impacted? Yeah.
Right, because I live in Gitati, you got way more tourism and people from other places
Yeah.
passing through Sebastopol than we do through Gitati.
And we have the same population basically.
Yeah. I like that.
So while we probably can't change the allocation, because that was, I think, hard coded.
No, this is for the project, the allocation. Are you talking about the allocation across the different categories, the top level categories? Or by
The methodology of determining how much each jurisdiction would get for the apportionment.
is that actually in the measure?
It is.
Yeah,
Yes, it is.
but I think that he brings up a very interesting point, and that while that might not change the actual allocation decision, it would be useful to study that more, to understand the quantitative impacts of this claim, because we don't have it in front of us exactly what that might be. But that might be very helpful for staff and the board to kind of start to get our heads around this. And maybe Chris could have some input into that
Yes.
discussion.
I will certainly bring it up to him and have a discussion with James and David about it as well.
Yeah.
Page 180.
Any more questions about this item?
I had one more thing. So I want to commend staff for biting off a lot here and chewing it as best you can. I started looking over the evaluation criteria, that section in 4.5. And the first thing that jumped out at me is that bullet that joins together air quality and greenhouse gas emissions. If we reflect on the fact that equity priorities are high on our list, I'm concerned about the merging of those two things, because while greenhouse gas emissions impact everybody, air quality impacts are oftentimes very localized. And if we combine these two things together in our criteria, we might overlook some of that. So just a suggestion, think about the possibility of disaggregating those two things. And yeah, the devil's going to be in the details for evaluating these projects. So I sympathize with what staff is agreeing to do here. But yeah, I think we should all kind of try and drill down into these things, the topics that are of interest to us, and see what we can do to help come up with specific criteria that will help staff and make decisions. Dennis may have.
This is back on our first and last mile. So under the section there, it doesn't specifically speak to SMART. It talks about bus, transit, this, that, whatever, but so on page, and that's 155, it actually doesn't, it just talks about bus and bus transit and routes and everything else. I just wonder if we can expand that to include SMART, is that consideration for first and last mile?
I could certainly talk to everybody about that. Absolutely. We'll take it under consideration.
Because I thought actually that we had that discussion prior to actually the vote.
We did, and
Yeah.
so SMART was not included in the measure. And it is the responsibility, my understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, Dana, that it's the operators that are responsible for the transit operators other than SMART that are responsible for that bus service and are the ones that are trying to implement. However, there is the first and last mile transit program that SMART just implemented at the airport.
Exactly.
And that is a pilot program, as I understand it. So it's not permanent, but if it works out, we could certainly look at that, using that as a framework for, implementing that in other places, and whether or not SMART would be responsible for that, or whether other jurisdictions or operators would be responsible for that.
One other question I had, and this is about EVs. One of the problems with EVs today is there's no signage. Those of us who drive EVs know where to find it. But one of the things that I got used to driving across the country was the gas sign at the next exit and all of those things. I just want to know if any of the funds would be available for programs that might start putting up EV at the next corner and the next, to show people where it is. And quite frankly, I've had this argument with a number of people. It's not so much that we need to sign for those of us who've been driving EVs. We need to sign for all those people who aren't driving EVs, so they start to recognize that, hey, the gas station's here, and by the way, there's just as many EV charge stations as there are gas stations. Actually, there's more in the country than there are gas stations at this point. But nobody knows about it because they're hidden in a grocery store, or they're hidden, behind the buildings or whatever else. But anyway, if somebody came along with a program to start adding signage, would that be something that could be funded?
It's certainly something that we could take into consideration. I don't know that we have any sort of definition on what we want to do with those programs. We left that sort of vague intentionally,
Okay.
so that it would be available as the technology changes. I can tell you that putting up signage on the freeway requires an encroachment permit from Caltrans, and because that's their jurisdiction.
And good luck if you've ever dealt with Caltrans and getting signage changes at the 101,
Indeed.
which I have personal experience of.
However, we might have some success in lobbying Caltrans for statewide changes in that regard.
Yeah.
Jake?
Yeah, I'm interested in integration of this effort with the overall MTC effort on transit integration. I can't remember the acronyms from MTC as well as I used to, but is there an effort being made as in the 9-county Bay Area, this effort to try to integrate transit operations?
Certainly, and that was what developed, that was what the 2019 study was a result. That's how we got to the 2019 study was MTC's initial, interest in integration throughout Bay Area. So I know that we had the 2019 study and we're still trying to implement that and get through what was identified in that study as, next steps.
Yeah, because coming back to that, I do remember that there was at least an effort to do what you were suggesting.
MTC is already staffing the function, and the task force I was on has now been identified as the Climate Advisory Committee or the Citizens Advisory Committee for that function at MTC.
Okay,
I suggest, probably to send to the group here a link with the 2019 transit study, just to, because I heard a lot of discussion or questions about it to refresh our memory.
Is there a link on the website for the study?
Yeah, Drew can, email a link.
Oh, please, yeah.
It's probably already in the documents library, but we'll make sure you get it linked to that.
Any other comments or questions? Otherwise, I see none. We'll move to the financial statements with James.
How about take my spot, James?
Yeah, just we got a mic. What is picking?
All right, so we had a successful fiscal year end. So our fiscal year ended on June 30th. After June 30th, we had a dual period where we continued to process revenue and expenditures, and we closed the books about a week ago. So because of that, there's no actual financial information in your packet. Those fiscal year end financial reports will be available to the Citizens Advisory Committee at the next meeting. Also at the next meeting, we will have received our August receivable from the California Department of Tax and Fee Administration. So we'll be able to report out on our estimated audited revenue, right? So there's the 2-month delay between when sales tax is actually paid by a consumer versus when sales tax is received by the SCTA. And so with that, you can expect some reports in August. That also explains the reports that the sales tax updates that are provided for you in the packet. So we're under contract with a consultant named HDL. HDL provided us with the January through March reporting, which has some takeaways that I can share with you with regarding, the impacts to our sales tax revenue from inflation to the very wet weather we've had, as well as the decrease in year over year for fuels costs. You'll see for the first time since the pandemic, we had general consumer goods drop, right? General consumer goods have been roaring because of the inability to purchase services, the inability to go anywhere, the purchases that have been happening during the pandemic. We also saw, even with inflation going up, consumer spending in restaurant, hotels continues to gain, and we expect that to continue a trend in the future. And then building construction down. There's a few different reasons for building construction being down, in addition to the very wet weather, inflation, and material costs. With that, in your packet, you'll also find a 2023 California sales forecast. So this is looking at the entire state, whereas the sales tax update for Go Sonoma is looking at just Sonoma numbers. And if you look at the entire state, you'll see they're forecasting a drop of 0.7% for fiscal year 24. So that's a June 23 document. That 0.7% actually mirrors the work that HDL did for us, estimating our fiscal year revenue back in April of this year. So we are also forecasting a 0.7% drop in fiscal year 24. All of this being wrapped up in the big picture, though, even though you're seeing the drop, we do expect about a 2% increase year over year once we get that final receivable in August. So that's the report out on the financials for this month. We'll have a lot more detailed numbers next month, and it concludes my report.
Real fast question, the 0.7%, is that after inflation or Is it including inflation?
No, it would be after. It would, yeah. After.
So it's a growth number.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So Happy New Year. And just you mentioned that we're still gonna be seeing that increase in absolute revenue. But how does that reflect on our usual trend? I think it's pretty close to our forecasted trend.
Yeah, fairly close to our forecasted trend. So our forecasted trend is about 3%. So it's slightly less than that, long 20-year trend that has all those peaks and valleys that average out to the 3% growth.
And how, just since you mentioned building construction was down so much, how do we compare to the state? I haven't looked at that yet.
It's down to
It's -6 at the state level, and we are significantly down, though, right?
Yeah.
Any reason for why that discrepancy might be there? We have a big boom?
I don't have an answer for the specifics of Sonoma County for that, but that is one of those things where having HDL under contract is pretty great. They can compare the statewide numbers to the Sonoma County numbers when we want to dig into that level of detail. So if that's something that you would like, I can reach out to HDL, provide it to you.
I was just thinking around the table if anybody had some anecdotal feedback.
It might just be a ramp down from the 2017 fires.
Rebuilding. That's
Rebuilding is just about, we've recovered the 7,000 homes. And so now we're just into a regular trend.
Yeah, that seems plausible to me. I mean, I know that I don't think that we would see the interest rate effect quite so quickly on this aggregate number for construction, but maybe we would.
Population is down just a bit.
That's true. But that would be across the board. But maybe it's having an effect on starts. All right.
I see in the table, comparing the first quarter of 2023 to 2022.
Correct.
I see the building and construction, our county is in fact negative 15%, which is very significant.
Oh, that's,
Yeah.
this is a good point.
And also if you go to the, like the table where, the revenue by business in the quarter, I see the number there, not encouraging, like in comparison to other counties and, just our county, take, like contractors about 16%, automotive 18% in the negative, I'm talking down. And building materials in the negative, down 15%. Did the consultant provide, any? I did not read the text.
Yeah, they do provide a high level analysis. They provide us with some confidential information that we're not allowed to share that goes business by business. So they give you adjusted numbers, right? So, we will get a receivable that may have a very large increase, one from quarter to quarter or from month to month, but they will pull out outliers. So let's say there's a business that sold off a large asset that had sales tax on it. That's an anomaly for that business. They will remove that from their analysis and provide adjusted numbers so you can see what the economy is doing as opposed to what an individual business is doing that's impacting our revenue. They'll also give highlights of various categories and then condense that down into this brief narrative, right? And looking at that, right? So where you have used automotives being really substantially down, that had to do with prices skyrocketing and inventory decreasing, whereas now we're finally getting the new automotives are starting to move. So that they talk about big picture things like that with us when we get an update.
That's why they are projecting a 2%, annual increase, like.
So actually, they're projecting for next year, negative 7%. For this year, they project negative 0.7 for next year. For this year, I believe they projected it was a minor negative The 2% increase for this year was not based on their actual or their forecast. It's based on the actuals that we received, because we received most of the funding. So we just got, another month's worth of revenue that's going to come up. So it's something, unless something's really out of whack there, we know what it is. So there's a combination of what they forecast versus what we know that we've received that we can just see for ourselves.
And when you plan, do you base it on the actual or what they provide the numbers,
So when we plan, we typically will plan 2 times a year, right? So we'll plan with our preliminary budget in May and our final budget in October. And we will typically rely on their forecasts and projections that they give us. And as we go through those sales tax categories, you can really see how it affects various programs within the sales tax measure, depending on what program it is. So like the next time we have that nice chart that we'll have that shows Go Sonoma and the various categories and the subcategories, you'll be able to see, for the categories that are allocations, those affect the amount of funding we're just going to hand to or pass through to a jurisdiction and then have them report out to you. So there's not a direct impact on the projects that we're implementing or the projects that we're funding. And then you can also see how it would impact future calls for projects, right? So future projects that we select, that's what allows us to decide how many dollars we can program. So it can definitely impact, the future sales tax Go Sonoma different than what it can affect Measure M. Because Measure M, we've always had the ability with this final list of projects to meet the needs of all of our jurisdictions. Because of the revenue that we've had has always been adequate for when they want to deliver their projects.
Glad to hear you plan based on the worst case scenario.
Yeah, we don't want to promise somebody dollars that we don't have.
Any questions?
Just a comment, as a construction and landscape material supplier locally, Tom was asking, does that sound right? I think the HDL consultant and material, that information is pretty accurate. Looking at our revenues, what's happening in private sector versus public sector. Private sector is slowed down, primarily single family dwelling housing. We've started some projects with clients and they've kind of pumped the brakes. I think you have just the simple economics, interest rates are 7%. And the price for a new house is not coming down commensurate with all of that. So people just aren't going to buy, the way we were seeing a year and a half, 2 years ago. And we're not building office space, right? People are still somewhat commuting from home, working from home. So but I would say that the government side with the grant money going into apartment complexes, we're still building a lot of dwelling units that way. We're still doing public infrastructure projects. Obviously, Measure M projects are scoped to go for the forthcoming year. Caltrans is still pumping out projects. So just my 2 cents.
Yeah, helpful.
Okay. I think that will do it for this. I think, thank you, James.
Thank you. I think Ross is up for the next one.
Take your spot there.
All right.
Good afternoon, everyone. So item 5 on today's agenda is seeking feedback on a couple things. The best way to consistently achieve a quorum with a countywide representation of citizen perspective, participation and involvement during these meetings. And so this was brought up by CAC members, and we just want to address it. This is a little different than what we did back in September, which was to allow vacancies, which has helped. We have been achieving quorums, but basically the overall CAC roster is comprised of identified interest groups, the 5 supervisorial districts, and it has been updated twice over the past 3 years. The last change has been the addition of 4 organizations in August 2020. My predecessor was involved with that.
The staff report does have details on those changes in organizations. So basically, the quorum issue was raised in September and we did the new vacancy policy. The question that's been raised now is regarding keeping organizations on the committee that do not send representatives. And so we're looking for input on that. We did another round of outreach and we did get North Bay Organizing Project. Thank you very much. And as well as some commitments for other organizations to submit representatives, but hasn't necessarily happened. So we're looking for input on how to handle the CAC roster. Now, to make official changes does require amendment of the administrative code. So that would require bringing it to the board and then having them vote on it on the next meeting. Some alternatives that have been brought up within the committee in the past few meetings, like a yearly evaluation or substitution of organizations that haven't sent representatives, or an overall reduction of CAC membership. At this time, yeah, any changes would need to be board approved, but we just want to get your input and just make, see the best way to go forward, as well as, yeah, that's a big one. But if you want more details, it's in the staff report, but we just like to open it up briefly to address this because it's come up a couple times. So not just quorum, but the actual overall roster of the CAC, how we want to proceed going forward. So
We'll open it for discussion.
I think it might be easier if you guys held your meetings on Zoom again. I think that might draw more people.
Our hands are a little tied in that respect due to the fact that this is a Brown Act meeting. We would love to have that be an option. However, at this point, we don't see any legislation that's going to be changing that within the next year.
Brian?
Have there been requests for participation that they don't qualify for something? For instance, I'm representing for a district. I could easily jump to realtors if somebody. We have a push pull. If we do about it, maybe there's some flexibility.
Sure, and in this case, it's what we require is, an official email from the organization saying this is the representative that we want. So in some cases, I know that people are stretched pretty thin. Some of these organizations would like to have, someone at the table, but they are just, doing so much. In other situations, it's, sounds like, go ahead, Arce.
Yeah, I just wanted to tag off of that, right, as another really small
I know you go to a
organization. Some
lot.
of it is,
Yeah.
it's always the bandwidth versus impact, right, balance, and, in terms of, I'm here because, if you're not at the table, you don't know what's going on, and you might be on the table in a different way, right? But there are lots of other committees I'm asked to be on, and I almost didn't come today because I had some other stuff that was coming up at work. And frankly, I sometimes feel like how do I say this? I'm just gonna say it. We don't really, sometimes I feel like we aren't really actually doing very much. We talk a lot. We get presentations and we talk, but what do we actually do? We don't decide anything. I mean, yeah, we get to give our input into things, and that's important. But to commit time and reading all of these reports when you've got other stuff to do, and does it feel like do I feel like what I'm doing makes a difference? Is the thing that people have to,
Right.
balance.
I'd like, if you may, I'll give it, let me just have a comment. I see on the packet, the agenda packet, page 3, the attendance.
Yeah.
Some organization, they did not attend any meeting since the beginning of the year. So it is unfair to include this organization or this organization in the count of the quorum. So probably a compromise I might see, if there is no nomination, like this, or I don't want to pick on anyone, like the North Bay organization projects. They did not, there are a few like them, but they are just, I saw them. They did not name anyone, and they did not attend any meeting. And there are 5, 6 organizations like them. Why do we include them in the core? I include someone in the core.
There is I'm sorry to cut you off, Mr. Chair, but it's not affecting the quorum in terms of numbers, because we are counting that as a vacancy due to what we did in September. So if they haven't attended in 3, we're considering that a vacancy.
Yeah, you are considered.
And then it's not hurting the quorum, it's more just, is there space for other organizations?
But the other thing, they sit there, then they don't attend anything, then they decide next year to come back. That's unfair. We need continuity.
I had the same thought, that you had. That's why
I'm sorry to interrupt you. I saw Steve, I give it to Steve, then to you.
Well, I think the connections that staff establishes with all these various groups is really important in terms of figuring out what the community needs. And it happens on a regular basis. It isn't just simply coming in at a meeting and making a public comment. Why are the taxpayers not in here? They belong here. They helped get the message, the measure passed. Now they want to see it implemented. They should be here. So how do we get out to them and really convince them?
Well, they've certainly been contacted. And I don't just hit the old emails. I'm usually going to their website, whatever the current contact information, in addition to the representative. So
Maybe that's our job to go and
Yeah.
after.
And when I looked at this, I looked at the blanks as well, and I go, well, we don't need those organizations, but then you look at the titles of the organizations, and that's what they really are. I mean, the tax organization, that would be a key one that you'd want to have a voice on.
Yeah.
I'm looking at the districts, and they're appointed, and I'm going, well, wait a second, whoever appointed them, maybe they should appoint somebody else. But I'm looking at the titles that don't show up, and I'm going, they sound like some of the titles that should have representation. Eris, just to your point, and I haven't been doing public service stuff all that long, probably since the 90s. And I had to develop an attitude, because government is set up so that it doesn't move too quickly. And that's on purpose. And so we all start to recognize that after about 5 or 6 years worth of doing this. And it's a matter of influencing the things that you say, that we say here. Staff may incorporate it in something that they write, or they may push something someplace else, and we'll see a small change. And I was involved in some efforts, and I realized that it took 10 years after we did the work that we started to see the results start to happen, that policy started to change as a result of that. So keep heart.
Being the senior member of this, I think I've been here over 30 years in this committee, that there's need for each one of these groups. And the people show up whenever they need to show up. They look at the agenda. And again, the taxpayers will be here whenever you have the next tax measure. And you try to go ahead and put in, they'll be here, they'll be giving their negative influence that you need to have to hear what's out there. And so I think the way you've handled it through the quorum process, you've addressed it as it needs to go through on a monthly meeting basis. But as an annual contact, or as much contact as you can, and Steve's idea of us reaching out to that group, easy enough time, the taxpayers we can reach out to do, and we will. And so no one really pressed us to do that or asked us to do that.
Yes.
So the other thing that I wanted to kind of tag onto is you were saying, Ross, that part of the purpose is wanting to, represent all the voices in the county and looking around this table, we very obviously don't do that, right? We're all over a certain age. We're practically all white. We all have the ability to come to a meeting in the middle of the workday. And there are lots of people who can't do that. And this is something that I just see in not just in this organization, but all the other organizations and entities that I'm a part of that want more diversity, but we want people to come do diversity in our structure, which isn't necessarily always going to work, right? You have to go to them often, right? If you want someone's input and they're not comfortable or able or otherwise for whatever reason to come into this structure or feel safe or feel at home, in this kind of a structure. You have to find other ways to go out and get it out there and not just keep saying, well, why aren't they here? Why aren't they here? Why aren't they here? I know why they're not here. I know why I wouldn't have been here 20 years ago. Yeah.
I was here 20 years ago. I see others, I were here 30 years ago. So,
I was working
but,
2 years to be a kid,
I think we're all working.
yeah. And yeah,
Mr. Chair.
So Ross, to the two supervisorial districts, 1 and 5 that are vacant, it seems to me like those would be 2 regular seats that would seemingly be easier to fill. If we simply ask the supervisor to really prompt, dig into their database of their constituents in their area and prompt somebody to sit in there.
Well, we certainly are, like District 5, we're working on a CAAC representative as well. I think I finally got one of those.
Okay.
So they're, in the case of, these are openings are going out in their newsletter.
So what's James's response in District 1? Is he working on anything? Oh, sorry.
I'm talking to the staffers, in that
Okay.
case. And they're trying.
probably an idea, to have, members of this group, like if they have good relationships with an organization, assign it, to them. And including, in fact, the supervisors, we have relationships, we can talk, directly to the supervisor and try to help us. Jake?
Yeah, just an anecdote in terms of District 1. I chair the Citizens Advisory Committee for CDC. I know Supervisor Gorin very well. I've worked with her closely for over 20 years. She tells me that they find it very difficult to persuade somebody from District 1 to travel back and forth to a meeting that lasts 1 to 2 hours. And so as long as I've been chair of this of that Citizens Advisory Committee, District 1 is vacant. And I asked, so I think your point about when the meetings are held, etc., that's a valid point. If I put my Greenbelt Alliance hat on, we have been talking in Sonoma County about how to get people to attend meetings. Do you pay them stipends? Do you provide childcare? And then you have the well-known problem with public agencies that if you are having evening meetings or weekend meetings, then you have these burdens. So I don't have any magic wand or any great thought about this, but you see who we are. We're people who have the luxury or the ability to be able to attend these meetings, and I do this. And I come from this from a totally different point of view, and that is having been an elected official for 24 years to come to advisory committees. Well, my recollection is, and Dennis, you will remember this because you've identified yourself as the longest serving member, that in terms of the influence that we as a committee have requires that the chair, and you did it many a time, appear in front of the board of directors and make points forcefully to these elected officials. That's why I wanted to become an elected official, because I wanted to be able to vote on these things and not advise. But if you are going to receive advice, then it needs to be delivered succinctly and strongly. And for example, on the what we were just discussing on a strategic plan, if we collectively had a very strong feeling about how integration of transit mechanisms should be accomplished, then we need to formulate that, and it needs to be presented to the elected officials. You guys have all testified for decades in front of elected bodies. You know this. I feel better now. Thank you.
Any more feedback about?
I just one simple observation. We don't have chaos. The staff, the measure has, we're going into the next phase. It's done what it's supposed to do. There's not a lot of uproar. It's frankly probably a good thing we don't have a big jam-packed meeting full of people who want to be members and get in here. Also, as long as things keep working well, I think this is a good problem to have.
I'd like to add to Eris's comment about equity, and I don't know when or how these membership organizations came to be, but I think the county has changed a lot in 30 years. I think when you look at the demographics of Sonoma County, you're going to see more than 30% are older adults, and that number is growing. A lot of those people are non-drivers. They need transportation to get to where they're going. We also have over 20% Spanish speakers, and I don't believe they are represented at the table. I don't know if these project sheets, are they available in Spanish? Are we publicate the transportation plans and all the documents, presentations, are they available to the public in Spanish? It's a public meeting. And so I'm just wondering how are we looking at equity from a committee standpoint?
Well, I will tell you that just as part of other outreach outside of CAC, we've been working with quite a lot of CBOs, and we're having trouble getting representatives from them as well. On the RCPA side, we've been doing a lot of outreach and getting to know some of these organizations really well, both Spanish speaking and then other communities in Sonoma County that aren't as represented. And, we're hoping to bring them to the table, but we're building relationships that are stretched pretty thin. Right.
And the other thing is, like Eris says, you got to go to them, you've got to speak to them in their dialect and invite them and do your outreach in that dialect. So they feel like they're a part of the committee, or they're part of the project, or they're included. And so there's not intimidation.
Okay, but I'm hearing, we'll continue like this. Try to do an outreach, to the organization, and we don't see a problem with the quorum because we, what you mentioned, excluding, the members who did not attend 3 meetings or more from the quorum. And if there are different feedback in the future, we will revisit. And thank you all. Thanks. Thank you, Russell. So agenda item number 6, any announcements? Yeah.
Well, it's not so much an announcement, it's congratulations. I was taking Smart south to go to San Francisco, and there was an accident on Heron. And so all of the trains were 15 minutes late, 14 minutes late. And the conductor came on and said, well, sorry, our train's gonna be 14 minutes late. And then he comes on a few minutes later and says, but for all of you who are trying to catch the ferry, we've called the dispatcher. The dispatcher called Golden Gate. They're talking to the captain and asking him to hold the ferry. And so I wrote to SMART and said, thank you very much. I've written to a number of people at MTC. That's the way our transit system is supposed to work. If you need a schedule to find out when you're going to catch something, then it has to be flexible. If you don't need a schedule and they show up every 3 minutes, then you don't have to be flexible. In San Francisco, you can catch a bus 3 minutes later, or a BART every 10 minutes. BART comes by. So you don't have a schedule. But here, when you making it flexible is really, really important. But anyway, I sent them congratulations. I thought this is the way our systems are supposed to be working.
Yeah, I wanted to share two stories of transportation issues over the last week. One of them good and one of them bad. The good one actually involved SMART. I'll start with the good one. So on Friday, I did a bike ride organized by my counterparts in Marin County of the Marin County stretch of the SMART path. And it was attended, by SMART board members, SMART staff, including General Manager Eddie Cummins and Chief Engineer Bill Gamlin and the head of the Chief Planner Emily Betts and folks from the board and a whole variety of people. And I'll be organizing a similar ride on the Sonoma County section probably in about a month or two when I get back from vacation. But it was really delightful to be sitting on the train with the general manager on the train, talking to people, and the conductors knew him and all of that. And the focus, when I first did one of those rides in Santa Rosa in 2018, part of the focus was, I want you on the board who don't ever go on the path to experience it and see what the problems are that people experience. But the focus this time was, here's a place where the path stops, and Bill would explain, how are we getting from here to there? We're going to put a bridge over this creek, and then this thing is planned, and this is when it's going to start construction. And so it was looking at filling in those gaps. And that was a very lovely day and wonderful shift and progress in what's happening with that path. Then the not so happy experience involved Caltrans. But also having to do with the bike path. So a few years ago, a section of a class 1 bike path was opened that connects from southern part of Petaluma Boulevard South, goes under the freeway at the county line and connects up to San Antonio Road on the other way. And that actually made it possible to commute back and forth between Novato and Petaluma. Before, you would have had doing like another 14 miles all up and around D Street in San Antonio. All of the floods and things back in the spring caused a landslide on Redwood Boulevard on the east side in Novato, and that has been closed to all vehicles ever since then while they're fixing it. Well, my counterpart and I were a lot of conversations with Caltrans, and they did just a week ago open a temporary bike path through there. You still can't get motor vehicles through, but they opened a bike path. So we joyously announced all of this to all of our bicycle constituents, only to have people say, well, I rode down there to go across and there's signs saying that it's closed. And it's closed because they're doing work on the San Antonio Bridge, which apparently started while everything was already closed for the Redwood Drive. And if you saw the sign, you just assumed it was that other closure, but no one at Caltrans had ever told the public about the closure at San Antonio. They didn't let either the bicycle coalitions know. There were no press releases sent out. It's not on the Caltrans website anywhere. It's not on the Caltrans social media anywhere. So we had a whole week full of back and forth with various people at Caltrans and different organizations to both find out, well, when will it be open? And hello, could you please notify people when you're going to, you wouldn't close 101 without notifying people in advance, but entities still seem to think it's okay to close bicycle paths without giving anybody any notice. So finally, notice has been made and things are shifted, but that's what I spent all the last week doing.
Any other announcements? I see none. I call the meeting adjourned. Thank you.
Great, thank you.
Ahead of schedule.
There's, I had one of the bad ones, pretty full gate. I went to the website to find out when to catch the bus. I went to the bus and I get there. That bus doesn't-
Apple and everything else. you
On
probably
the
have
app,
to-
it has little lines. across, but
They were having
a. Anyway, there's a.
iPhone class.
At the stop, there's a sign there.